Hey, how's it going everyone? Nota here. Today I wanted to talk about my three favorite Xilonen teams, or perhaps more specifically, three of my favorite characters that got a really nice buff thanks to Xilonen. So without further ado, let's begin. First up, we have a character that many people have been talking about, and that is Mualani. Now, Mualani plus Xilonen, I don't think it's a secret to anyone how strong this duo is. It's been talked about a lot by a lot of people, but personally, I was just blown away by how powerful Mualani became thanks to Xilonen. Now, I should clarify. I have her signature weapon, so I'm definitely going to be getting exaggerated results compared to what I think most people are going to experience, which is where she doesn't have her signature weapon. However, with Mualani specifically, if you do plan on using Xiangling, who is generally going to be the most consistent off-field pyro applicator, and depending on the rest of your team, might even be the only one that is actually applying enough pyro, Xiangling is extremely energy hungry. And you're generally going to be wanting to run Favonius on Xiangling, and you're going to want to give her as much ER as possible. But you don't just want Favonius on Xiangling, you're going to want at least one other character on the team with Favonius. For me, that is Xilonen, right, on Favonius Warbow. But if for you, that is Xilonen, because Favonius is a perfectly good fit for Xilonen if you don't have her signature, and you don't have Freedom Sworn, and Freedom Sworn's kind of a pain to activate the effect of, so even if you do have Freedom Sworn, but especially, if you don't have her signature, and especially if you don't have Freedom Sworn, Favonius Sword is going to work wonders. It's not really helping her buffing at all, but there aren't really other options that are helping her buffing, and it is going to help a lot with energy, which is especially important for Xiangling on this team. I went with Xilonen, in part because my Xilonen is Constellation 1, which means she's especially good at generating energy. C1 plus Favonius Warbow, definitely an overkill for Xilone's own energy needs. However, very, very nice for generating energy for Xiangling, as well as Mualani. Mualani effortlessly is bursting every rotation here, which is very nice because her burst is very powerful. However, there are alternatives to these two teammates. Xiangling can be replaced with other off-field pyro applicators, most notably Dia and Xinyan. I tested Dia, and she feels pretty inconsistent because if the enemy just leaves her field, like the current Consecrated Beast, it's rough. I haven't tested Xinyan because mine is only level 50, but I imagine she's more consistent than Dia, but at the same time, if her shield breaks, she loses the off-field pyro. Just generally, Xiangling, a lot of pyro application, very consistent, and you can even have someone doing a little bit of off-field hydro and still consistently vape with Mualani because Xiangling is applying so much pyro. So Xilonen is a good choice here. Farina is the team's theoretical damage ceiling, but the vapes are so inconsistent. And if Mualani misses a vape, it's a huge damage loss. Now, Farina makes up for it by having great damage herself, and if Mualani misses a vape, it's because Farina got a vape. But still, it's inconsistent, and that feels bad. But I will say, if you're willing to do the resets to keep trying until Mualani vapes all her hits, you're going to get some insane clears with this. Another more niche option you can go for is Nilou. If you have Nilou's signature weapon, the Key of Kajnisut, then Nilou turns into an EM buffer for the team. You don't have to use Nilou's off-field application, so Nilou can work without risking losing vaporizes. Other hydro options are Mona, who has very good front-loaded buffing, because her buff is very powerful, but it's a very short duration. This makes her quite nice for speedruns, and she's still perfectly good for more casual play. Just note that she's not the most consistent at generating energy or proccing Favonius, so not necessarily the most ideal with Xiangling, but you can still make it work. But Also, a thing about Mona is, if you've lost quite a few 50/50s to her, and you've collected some of these constellations, the C1 especially is very good for this team because it gives 15% more vaporize damage. And if your Mualani isn't capping on crit rate despite having all that crit rate from her Ascension stat and her artifact set, because most people are going to be running her on her best artifact set, which is Obsidian Codex. But generally, if you have Mona, especially C1 Mona, is a nice choice here. And the last character, and I haven't tested her myself because, similar to Xinyan, she's only level 50, but Candace is another good option here, buffing Mualani's normal attacks, whilst, again, providing the Hydro Resonance, providing the Hydro Energy, though she doesn't really generate that much energy. And so, yeah, this is actually a really nice team for Candace, which is really cool. So there's a lot of good options for this slot. And you don't have to do a Hydro. You have other options as well. You could do Zhongli for comfort. You don't really need Zhongli. Mualani has good interruption resistance. But Mualani getting interrupted does feel really bad because she's got pretty tight damage windows. You could do something like double Pyro, so something like this, to help with Shangling's energy requirements. Although, the weird thing about this is that, like, sometimes Dia alone is enough Pyro out, and then you don't even need Shangling. You're not really benefiting from Pyro Resonance either. This isn't the strongest synergy ever, but, it's an option. And then you also have the teams with an Animo unit, like Kazuha or Sucrose, where you go into Mualani, then you go into Xilonen and you use her skill and her 2 normal attacks. And what you'll have done is you'll have done a Crystallize to proc the scroll set on Xilonen, which is this set right here. That's going to give 40% damage bonus. But there should still be Hydro left on the opponent. Then you go into your Animo and you swirl to proc the Viridescent set. And then, of course, you go into Shangling and then into Mualani. So there's a lot of options, some of them more on the comfy side, some on the more powerful side. Again, this has been my favorite variant. That's definitely in part because my Yelan is C1. Overall, did Mualani need a buff? Not really. She was already really strong. But hey, she's even stronger now to the point where she's arguably the strongest DPS in the game. I would still personally give it to Neuvillette, especially because he's another character that got a big buff from Xilonen, but I don't have him, so he's not made this video because I haven't personally experienced the Neuvillette Xilonen synergy for myself. But anyway, next up, we have Arataki numero uno Itto. In the past, Itto's team options were extremely limited. Well, arguably they still are. Basically before, he was stuck running Mono Geo. He had other options, but they weren't very good. I guess you could play him in Plunge, but like, whatever, you can play anyone in Plunge. Itto was honestly kind of struggling before because he wasn't improving over time like everyone else was, as we got various new characters like Farina, or like just the Dendro element as a whole, characters like Farazan or Chevreuse that were playing into certain niches. Basically, everyone was getting buffed in some way or another over time. Except Itto. I mean, yeah, he got Chiori, so like he could replace one sub DPS with another stronger sub DPS, but it wasn't like that significant of an upgrade to the overall team. Because the team's still like Itto is the main damage dealer and Chiori wasn't doing anything to increase his damage. In comes Xilonen, and for many Geo characters, they got a long-awaited buff. This also kind of changes Itto's team archetype, because his other main go-to buffer is Goro, who wants 3 Geo characters on the team, and there's really little reason not to fulfill the 3 Geo character requirement, because there's just not that many characters that are that synergistic with Itto. But with Xilonen, she kind of has the opposite requirement. You can't have 3 Geo characters or else Xilonen loses her supportive value. But the upside here is that she's providing healing, which means you can run Farina. So you now have this Itto, Xilonen, Farina core that's very powerful. The last slot is quite flexible. And there's honestly no one that's exceptional here, but I do like Xilonen here quite a bit. She has alright personal damage, because Itto is sometimes doing normal attacks. She's helping Furina's energy requirements, which means you can build more damage on Furina, and Furina in turn is letting you build more damage on Xilonen, and they benefit each other through Hydro Resonance. And Yelan's ramping damage bonus is going to be further buffs for Itto. If you want, you could also use Bennett here, and you can use any other manner of sub DPS unit. For example, you could always just throw in a Fischl if you want. Like, if you just, hey, I like Fischl. Or, hey, Fischl's a good unit that I have free to put on this team. Then, hey, go for it, right? But generally, you know, I think most people are going for Bennett or Xilonen in this slot. But honestly, there's no one who's super synergistic, which does lead me to believe that this team has a good amount of upward growth potential, because Xilonen feels so replaceable here. But there's not really anyone better than her just yet. Regardless, I was very, very pleasantly surprised by how strong this team is. I know that this is a really, really good Abyss for Itto, with the current Blessing giving a, I believe it was a 60% defense boost. But even still, this just feels like such a big upgrade over Mono Geo, and I've played Mono Geo in this Abyss as well. So, honestly, I'm really happy. Itto is one of my favorite characters, and he's kind of been underwhelming for far too long. I think a lot of people might say that Itto's being carried by the supports here, but I don't think so, because he's still the main source of damage on this team, and the team feels really good. It's really strong. So honestly, Xilonen was a really big win for Itto, which is great. And finally, we have my absolute favorite team in the game, using my favorite character as the main DPS, Barbara. DPS, Barbara. No, I am not joking. Hear me out, okay? I'm not gonna pretend that DPS Barbara is now this crazy meta unit. No, that's not really true. Or at least, if that's true, it's because you mean, like, playing her as the DPS in a Nilou Bloom team, which is a completely different thing. I'm talking about a Barbara you build hydro damage and crit on. A Barbara that you build attack on, and EM like you do in a Nilou team, but, you know, you're building stats other than EM as well. I'm talking about a Barbara where you level her normal attack talent. I'm talking about a Barbara where she is truly a main damage dealer in the conventional sense. Not like, oh, I'm using Bloom reactions. No. I'm talking Barbara just doing like 130k charge attacks and destroying everything. What's really nice about Xilonen as an upgrade here, I didn't talk about this with Mualani, but it's similar to Mualani. She has a really good buff duration in a way that Animo units don't. And it's a bigger deal for Barbara, actually, because when you're doing your setups, you generally will want to go into your, in other teams, Animo unit before Bennett and Xiangling, and then you just don't have that much time on their buffs. The other thing, though, is the Animo units you might want to bring, someone like Kazuha or Sucrose. Yeah, there's some maybe scuffed ways where you can kind of get a better swirl setup, but it's just not going to have the uptime that you would like. But the real worst part about this is that you don't have interruption resistance, and this is actually why, in the past, I've generally used Zhongli as my go-to for this team. No one provides interruption resistance quite like Zhongli does. His shield is basically unbreakable, and the fact he's giving that free 20% universal resistance shred is also very nice. There's some other nice options in the slot, like I like Nahida as well. She's giving an EM buff, and she's having some burning and burgeon shenanigans happen, which is actually really nice if you have the Tome of Eternal Flow, or Wriothesley's weapon, Cash Flow Supervision, on her. These are both really good weapons if you have a consistent source of self-damage taken, and a way to heal it, of course, which, of course, you do. You're playing Barbara and Bennett. But I've just found Xilonen to be the best, and perhaps more specifically, the best in terms of Barbara's personal damage and how big of a number you see when Barbara does that charge attack. And I love seeing a big number when Barbara does a charge attack. Now, I do want to make something clear, on top of just the fact that, really, if you just want to play, like, DPS Barbara in general, but you don't care if she's, like, a conventional DPS or not, you can just do Nilou Bloom, and it will be a lot stronger than this. The other thing is, Xilonen. C1. I have her C1. Is C1 worth going for most players, beyond just as a stepping stone to her C2? Not really. However, with a character like Barbara that really wants interruption resistance, I think this can be good. Now, Barbara really wants interruption resistance because she's doing her damage through charge attacks, and charge attacks cost stamina. You don't want to waste that stamina on dodging. You want to face tank as much as you can get away with face tanking, because that leaves you with more stamina left for charge attacks. It also just really hurts to get interrupted mid-charge attack and then not get the damage off. So I will say, Xilonen really wants to be C1 for DPS Barbara, but you know, it's DPS Barbara. You gotta be dedicated, you know? Generally, I guess Xilonen is more of a higher investment option for DPS Barbara, but it's just nice to see her have a good higher investment option. Previously, closest thing we had to this, an option that scales with like high constellation investment, was Shen Yun. C2R1 Shen Yun is very, very nice. She's a really great pull if you want to vertically invest into your Barbara, and I mean vertical investment both in the sense of making the damage number higher and making Barbara physically go higher in the sky. That, you know, literal vertical investment. And honestly, I'm not going to pretend that Xilonen is a clear upgrade over Shen Yun. I think Shen Yun is generally a lot better in single target, and probably just better overall. But Barbara just doesn't have as much identity here. Her plunge attack animation is just whatever. It's just a generic plunge attack animation. You could use like Mualani here, and she has that. Barbara doesn't have that. I used to do the Barbara plunge teams, and I still play them sometimes, but I just way prefer using her charge attacks. Here's Barbara's plunge attack animation. It's just whatever. I mean, it's just, she just becomes a Hydro Ball and then is no longer a Hydro Ball after she lands. Okay, cool. Whatever. It's just a generic plunge animation. And here's her charge attack animation. It's gorgeous. It's so pretty. And it's also so funny and so satisfying seeing it hit like 120, 130, 140,000 damage. It's so satisfying. It's so satisfying. So personally, I prefer Xilonen on this team quite a lot compared to Shen Yun. And I just prefer the charge attack archetype. But I will say, if you are just trying to make Barbara do as much damage as possible, I think Shen Yun is still the way to go for a much kind of easier and probably more powerful gameplay experience. But it's just, Shen Yun wasn't doing what I wanted, which was to use Barbara's charge attacks. And so that's why, for me, Xilonen has been really, really a huge help. Once again, before you pull Xilonen to help DPS Barbara, I will say she's losing a lot of value if she doesn't have that Constellation 1. Because playing DPS Barbara with no interruption resistance feels quite bad. So there's your fair warning, but I'm just really happy and excited and hyped that this works as well as it does, because it's my favorite team, and Xilonen is such a wonderful upgrade. I'm even tempted to go for C4 on her rerun, just to max this out. In conclusion, Mualani is now one of the top DPS units in the game. Itto is good now, and Barbara is just amazing and the best, as always. Thank you all so much for watching. If you found the video enjoyable or insightful, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more Barbara propaganda. Until next time.